if they're not eating foods that contain those sorts of nutrients or supplementing adequately, then they might not be feeling so good. And then once they go back on eating, animal products, they might be feeling great again. And that sort of reaffirms the belief that, you can't be healthy on a vegan diet.
Okay, Melissa. Hey, so welcome first of all to the Vegan Body Coach podcast. Really happy to have a sit-down chat with you. As I mentioned to you before, it's been a long time since I've actually done a seated podcast in person. And the last time, actually not the last time, but when I initially started the podcast was in Melbourne. And I flew over here in 2020, early 2020, right before the pandemic. And I did a bunch of podcasts with various people here in Melbourne. But yeah, it's been basically 3 years almost since then. And now we're up to, this is episode 47. So it's awesome to be back. Awesome to have you on the podcast. And I guess a great way to start this thing is for maybe you to give us a bit of an intro into who you are and like kind of how you got into the nutrition space. I'm actually interested in kind of where that kind of career choice came in for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on. Really excited to be here today. For those who don't know me, my name is Melissa and I'm a dietitian based here in Melbourne, and I specialise in vegan plant-based diets, as well as working in the gut health space, so irritable bowel syndrome as well, and a various host of other women's health conditions too. So I guess my journey really started with nutrition at quite a young age. When I was a bit younger, I was on the, overweight sort of side, and I was expressing to my mum that I wanted to lose weight. So she took me to see a dietitian because she wanted me to do it in a healthy way. And after that first consultation, I loved what the dietitian was doing. I thought it was so incredibly interesting. And I said to my mum from there, I want to be a dietitian when I'm older. This is what I would like to do. So from there, in high school, I tailored my subjects towards the nutrition and science sort of side of things. And then I guess when I was around the age of 17, sort of 18, I myself was developing a lot of gut issues, irritable bowel, and from that, a lot of adverse health effects sort of came up, and I saw a dietitian and she helped me to get over that and figure out what was going on. So that just reaffirmed my belief in nutrition and, sort of that career path that I wanted to go down as well. So that's really what led me to go down the nutrition way, I suppose.
Yeah, it's cool. So all of that's really come from, I guess, a personal experience that you've had. Like you've really actually been able to have, you've had to deal with some kind of obstacle in the past with the nutrition, and dietetics has helped you, or dietitians have helped you. And it kind of sparked that interest for yourself, which is really cool. I'm interested to hear, when was the first time you saw a dietitian? Like how old were you at that point?
I believe I was 12 or 13.
Okay.
Yeah, at that time.
Yeah. And do you mind sharing how they actually helped you at that time? Because, you said you were dealing with some overweight issues, and they really helped you through that?
Yeah.
And you had great success there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what was really good was she taught me about what my requirements were at that time. So because obviously I was still growing, she didn't talk about it from a restrictive point of view. It was more just about, okay, you still need your calcium, you still need your protein and everything. Like we need to make sure that you're prioritizing these sorts of nutrients, right? But teaching me about, okay, the portion sizes and maybe the bit more about the frequency of my treat foods, because I was probably going a little bit overboard, being at that totally. Sort of age.
Yeah.
Always wanting like a little bit of chocolate or ice cream, that sort of thing. So she sort of taught me a bit more about balance and the frequency of that.
Yeah.
Like when to have certain foods and when not to. And I thought it was really interesting, particularly about the nutrient requirement. That's what led me down that path, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite, I guess it's quite pertinent to this conversation because, we're going to talk about, achieving a balanced diet, especially as a vegan or someone following a more plant-focused diet. But even for people who aren't, and I'm not too sure actually, but I'm assuming at that age you weren't eating plant-based, or
no, I wasn't.
So majority of the population and you in that same scenario basically dealing with the fact that majority of the Western world are not eating any kind of a balanced diet, because we're in this food environment that's just so conducive to overconsumption of, highly processed, highly palatable foods, which is obviously, what led you to that position as well for yourself. And then kind of having someone to help you and teach you, here's how you find balance. I guess the sad thing is like the majority of the population, it's going to be hard for them to get there because not everyone has access to a dietitian or has access to the education, and they're really just going into the supermarket and grabbing the cheapest options, which is usually those types of foods. And I feel like we're really doing, I guess, a disservice to the entire population by not making that more of a ingrained kind of like health education in our system of around like how do you achieve a balanced diet. Yet no one really knows. They're all just going out there and eating what's out there,
Absolutely. It definitely is a really big issue out there, and I think we should acknowledge that there are definitely like areas even of different foods that aren't available to you. Like some people live in what we'd consider a food desert sort of area where the closest supermarket might be like a 20-minute drive from them, and that accessibility is also really difficult. So not only is it the sort of lack of education, but also like how can they physically get these sorts of foods that they need to get.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it's a tricky one because obviously the solution is not so much on the individual, it's kind of more top down. So it is a real tricky one to come up against. But I guess with this particular conversation, we're going to, I guess, more so what I'd like to do is, I guess, help to educate people who are listening, who are probably already, have some level of privilege and access to foods and a variety of different foods at that. By nature of them listening to this podcast, they're probably already in that camp. So they probably have the opportunity to go out and make these really, really good decisions for their health. Yeah. But giving them some kind of, education and kind of understanding of how to do that properly, especially as a vegan or as a vegetarian or pescatarian or whatever it is, someone who's just reducing animal products, how can they do it in a balanced way? And maybe to even, actually, before we do, where did plant-based eating come in for you, Melissa?
So it sort of got introduced to me maybe let's say around 10 years ago, the concept, and it was more from an ethical perspective rather than like a health reason that I decided to make the change. I'd come across like a few documentaries and videos around the ethical side of how animals are treated in the whole agricultural industry. And I had wanted to go vegan for quite some time, but I was still pretty young and my parents were a little bit hesitant, obviously not really knowing too much about, how to get the proper nutrients and stuff. So I gradually did it. So, first thing to go was sort of like red meat and then chicken and then the dairy and so on and so on. So I guess in total I've been vegan for about 9 years now. And yeah, I haven't looked back since then, but it definitely was from getting education around the ethical side of things. Yeah.
Amazing. Wow. So you're like an OG vegan. 9 years is pretty long.
Yeah, 9 years. Yeah. It was very different back then.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. So I think, majority of people I know, it's kind of more like in the 3 to 5 year range of, being vegan, but 9 years is a pretty long time.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. The food selection wasn't quite as good then. It's definitely improved now.
Yeah. And your family were supportive of that decision?
And initially not really, but once they sort of saw like, okay, she's still eating and, the foods that she's eating isn't really that different from what we're eating and it's not as hard, they were on board with it. Yeah. And now it's just normal. Like they don't even think about it. It's just like second nature. Yeah, totally.
Well, maybe we can circle back to, that around how you kind of achieved, a nutrient adequate diet, in those early days. Mm-hmm. But maybe as we go into this conversation, one of the big things that we see relatively often in the media is like, pretty big name celebrities who have done veganism for a certain amount of time, or, maybe we should say they've been plant-based. And they've gone back on that and brought some animal products back into their diet, usually because they feel like they're not healthy without them, or they're having some kind of health complications and they're, struggling to get nutrients and all that kind of stuff. And we all see it, but I'm wondering if you can speak to whether a plant-based diet or a plant-exclusive diet can actually be nutriently adequate for humans, and can humans actually be healthy on a plant-exclusive diet? Like, are these people actually are there issues warranted with regards to getting nutrients, or are they just not maybe trying hard enough, or what do you think on that?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely possible to eat a plant-exclusive diet and be healthy, but we should acknowledge that it might require a bit more planning and education on exactly how to do that, which I suppose we'll get into in a bit more detail. It's got hard to say why people go back on to, eating animal products again. I guess it's individual circumstances, but some reasons that I've seen is mainly due to lack of education around the nutrients required. So everyone knows about protein and iron, like they're the two most commonly sort of spoken about nutrients, but what people don't really pay much attention to is the micronutrients and the vitamins and minerals, that sort of thing, that you might require. And, if they're not eating foods that contain those sorts of nutrients or supplementing adequately, then they might not be feeling so good. And then once they go back on eating, animal products, they might be feeling great again. And that sort of reaffirms the belief that, you can't be healthy on a vegan diet.
Right.
But it absolutely is appropriate, and you can be healthy on a vegan diet. When we look at some of the literature and the studies around what is healthy and what are the best sort of dietary patterns to be eating, the Mediterranean diet does come up quite a bit, and that is a bit of a plant-focused sort of diet. So even if you're not 100% vegan or plant-based yet, even by just incorporating more plant-based foods into your diet, you're still going to be getting those health benefits and the reduced risk of those chronic diseases. Yeah.
What do you think it is about, with these certain individuals, if they bring, some kind of animal products back into their diet and suddenly they start feeling good again? Is it just because of the ease of access of those nutrients from specific animal products?
Yeah, I think that can play a role because, for example, iron, right? Let's take that as an example. The absorption rates of iron are a lot higher in animal products, so you don't need to eat as much as what you'd need to plant foods.
Yeah.
Because the absorption rates are lower. So I guess that ease of access and like the convenience of it, people don't have to think about it so much, and they're already feeling better. Like another couple of nutrients I can think of is sort of like, around your omega-3s and your iodine that people don't really consider too much. And once you go back to like eating fish and dairy products, you're automatically getting that. So they're feeling better straight away. But you can get them on a plant-based diet. It just requires a little bit of education on what foods fall under that. Yeah,
and I definitely don't think it has to be crazy complicated for people as well. Like, I think it can be quite basic, because I guess you run the risk of making it seem like a plant-based diet is this really, really hard thing to master. Like, you have to find balance, or you're gonna be deficient, blah blah blah. And I think it can be quite simple and quite easy. And to be honest, transitioning to a predominantly plant-based diet will be a big upgrade for majority of the population who are currently consuming the standard Western diet, just by including more plants.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, it can come across as quite complicated. Like, you have to hit your iron, you have to get your iodine. It's like, oh my god, there's all these different nutrients. And we're gonna obviously jump into it and maybe provide some insight there, but then maybe we can summarize at the end and try and make this as simple as possible for people, to help them to know that, hey, look, it is not going to have to be rocket science. You don't have to know everything, but there's probably just some of that initial education that's important for you. Did you get some of that education when you transitioned to veganism those early days?
I didn't actually, because I didn't go to see a dietitian for that specific reason at the time. And when I was having the gut issues, I wasn't vegan as of yet. So for me, it was really finding out a little bit more when I was doing my nutrition degree. That's where I probably found out the bulk of the information. And then through my own research as well, finding out about, what are the key nutrients. But you're definitely right. It's not as difficult, or it's not like this massive complex thing that needs to have meticulous planning around. It's definitely quite some simple and easy things. And once people know what they are and can do them, that they'll be feeling great and they'll be doing really well on a plant-based diet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe we can, start by diving into maybe some of the symptoms of what maybe an unbalanced diet would actually feel like. For people who are listening, maybe there's certain things that they're experiencing, and that's a light bulb moment for them to say, oh, maybe I'm not quite getting everything into my diet here. So what are some of those indicators that an individual might need to put a little more planning into their meals?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say one of the key sort of symptoms is that you're constantly feeling fatigued and tired despite getting enough sleep and enough rest. Might be an indication that you're, for example, iron deficient, zinc deficient even. If you're noticing that, like say you work out in the gym and your progress is declining, and you're not lifting what you used to be lifting, or can't run it as far as you used to run. So there's a bit of a regression happening there. That's definitely a telltale sign that things are sort of going on. As is, I would say, hair and nail changes. If your nails are becoming pretty brittle, your hairs are falling out, could be a symptom of zinc deficiency. The other one is if you're constantly bloated as well. It might be a bit of a sign that, you're not eating quite the right balance of nutrients going on. There may be a bit of underlying food intolerances there, but definitely something that is good to explore as well. And the other one I'd say is if you're getting sick a lot, like sick quite easily, might be a sign that your immune system's down and you're not getting what you need to be getting. I think, those are probably like the main sort of things, but you will probably know as well. Like it won't be something that like you just, wake up one day and you're like, oh, I might be deficient. Like you're definitely going to feel the signs and symptoms first. You're not going to be feeling like yourself.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good point, is that I guess there's the other side at the same time where people might just think that everybody feels like that, that everybody feels constantly fatigued, or maybe they just, kind of put it down to, oh, I'm just stressed at the moment, or, maybe I'm just not getting enough sleep, but maybe there is some kind of underlying imbalance there. What would be, I guess, the cornerstones from your perspective of a balanced diet? Like, what does that even mean for you as a dietitian to help someone to achieve balance? Like, what does balance even mean?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think what balance means is not just about having the right ratio of nutrients for your requirements, but also the mental side of things, of having that aspect of food freedom and not feeling like you're restrained by low carbohydrate, high carbohydrate, fat restricted diets, that sort of thing. So it means having an adequate amount from each nutrient pathway, but not feeling like you're being put in a box that you have to eat no carbs, low carbs, or that you have to like completely cut out a certain food like oils from your diet. I think being vegan, it's also for some individuals a bit of a pipeline into the wellness sort of thing. Like, you sort of get your subsets, like your high carb, low fat, or like removing oils, that sort of thing, or your raw veganism either as well. Sorry, I should say.
Yeah.
I think that is not balanced. Those things are not healthy. If you're consuming like the right amounts of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds from your core food groups, and having like your supplements and your fortified foods, you'll likely be okay. That's what balance is to me, and not restricting yourself and eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full. For me personally, that's what I define balance as.
Yeah, that's awesome, because it's not all just about the micronutrients or the macros. It's actually like do you have flexibility in your diet? Like, do you feel like you have freedom to consume what you want to consume, that you're not completely, like you're saying, restricted, and, feeling like you're not actually enjoying the way you eat? And I think that's a really good place to be in. And a lot of these, like you're mentioning, a lot of these, I guess, camps or subsets that people are in ends up being quite on the extremes. I guess a balanced diet would be more so something that kind of sits in the middle. And obviously people would argue that veganism was already on the extreme end. However, it's kind of comes back to like, well, it depends what you class as extreme. You know what I mean? Like, if not consuming animal products and contributing to animal suffering and forest deforestation and biodiversity loss, etc., is extreme, then I think we need to redefine that word.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I really love that. So it's not just about the intricate stuff. Now, when you do look at finding balance, say with clients in your practice, what are some of those key areas that you do start to focus on when you are looking at a client's diet and going, okay, how do we achieve balance here? Is it we're just looking at some macronutrient ratios, or are we diving deep into micronutrients? Are we looking at like how do we build our plate? What are some of the keys and cornerstones that you kind of focus on with balance?
Yeah, definitely a combination of all those aspects that you just mentioned, because it's not just about the macronutrient and micronutrient distribution there, so it is important. But what you mentioned about diversity, that's also super important in order to get to hit your target for those macro and micronutrients too. Like if you're just eating the same foods every single day, you're not going to be getting all the nutrients that you need. So having that flexibility to be open and trying new things is really important. Definitely going through like, portion sizes and, sort of like we were speaking about the plate model, that sort of thing too. Being able to learn how to build a meal from the ground up and making sure that it's nutritionally balanced, so that you're not really having to think and plan too much ahead of time. So I think all those sorts of aspects are really important when looking at balance. And I also look at people's relationship with food too. Like if they're like too scared to eat out on a weekend, or they're too scared to include a little bit of chocolate here and there, I sort of like probe and push the boundary, like, okay, why is this? Where is this stemming from? What do you think will happen if you consume these foods?
Yeah.
So I think, it's important to acknowledge like the mental side of things too, because I really don't believe that you can't be balanced if you're like restricting something in some sort of way, like to an excessive point of view, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. It's like when I work with clients, I work with a lot of fat loss clients, and I'm very aware that it's important for us to work in those foods that they really do enjoy, those bits of chocolate, that ice cream, whatever it is that they love, into their day, into the everyday, to ensure that they never are feeling fully restricted. Yes, there has to be some kind of restriction, because we have a goal of weight loss. We need to achieve the calorie deficit, so we do have to pull back a little bit. But like you're saying, if we're just restricting everything that they love, and I guess coming back to the idea of like, whenever you're in a phase like that with nutrition, you should be consuming in a pattern of eating that is somewhat like you're going to be doing after the diet ends as well.
Yeah.
So it's not this massive shift, but it's a slight adjustment. And so you're practicing balance, as we're talking about, throughout a fat loss phase, as you would practice it in a maintenance phase, or whatever else you're doing. So like you're saying, the mental side can't be understated either. Now, when it comes to, I guess, a vegan diet, what are some of the, like, if for listeners who are listening, like, what are some of the key nutrients of concern for them that they need to be focusing on to ensure that we are actually healthy? These people who are coming back from a plant-based diet, eating animal products again, what do you think they're actually missing?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So as I said before, like we all sort of know about, protein and iron, they're the two most common ones, but also calcium is really important, as is, I'd say, zinc, your omega-3s, and then your lesser known sort of nutrients like your iodine and your selenium as well. And then, of course, vitamin D too flows into that, and your B12 as well. Absolutely. I think one of the most important ones is the B12. But I find people are usually pretty good with managing sort of, B12 supplementation. But then I think you do have the odd one or two sort of clients who don't like to supplement. And B12 is one of those key nutrients that you absolutely have to supplement, even if you are eating foods that are fortified with it. So if the manufacturer has added their nutrient into that food, just because of the absorption rate, sometimes they're not. You can't be getting an adequate amount. That supplementation side of things is really important as well.
So what you're alluding to is that, like, even if someone was consuming, a couple of tablespoons of nutritional yeast each day, and they were having like a fortified plant milk that had B12 and maybe a couple of other things, that wouldn't quite reach the daily kind of threshold that they need to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. I would still be recommending a supplementation on top, and that can be oral, or you can get injections if you're finding that you're just not very good at taking the supplement every day.
Totally. I put my hand up on that one. I'm always forgetting. I made the habit of putting the B12 like pill bottle in my truck, so it's like in the dash. So when I get in the morning, I see it, and I'm like, all right, gotta take my tablets, because otherwise, I do forget. And
same here.
I do have clients that I've worked with who have been vegan for a very long time, and they've never supplemented, and they're great, they're fine, but I've always said to them, hey, look, well, who knows, like, for a lot of people, it takes a while for that B12 deficiency to actually take effect. So I'm like, it's a pretty simple and relatively cost-effective thing just to do, and like have it as a safety net, because the downsides of not taking it are not really worth the risk.
No, absolutely. Like B12 deficiency, the side effects are not great to be dealing with. You've got, your nerve damage, and your DNA sort of replication can be, impaired. And I can speak from personal experience, because I made the mistake of, at the start, not supplementing, and I was getting tingling hands and feet all the time, and like a burning sensation.
Wow.
And I got my B12 checked, and it was just like bottom down, and I was eating fortified foods all the time. So I can be the first one to put my hand up and say, yep, I stuffed up on that one very early on. And I felt better immediately after I had my B12 injections. And I am terrible at remembering, so I actually get injections too.
Oh, cool. Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, that's good to hear from someone who's actually had the experience of the symptoms, which is very interesting. I haven't actually spoken to anyone who's been through that. So that's really cool. You can, be a walking, talking advocate for B12. Do you know anything about the absorption with B12? It's quite an interesting one that I've had a look into myself. I don't know if you read much about it.
Yeah, it's a really tricky concept to explain, and I'm probably not going to explain it very well, but essentially only certain amounts can be absorbed at one point in time. So even if the packet says it has 2,000 micrograms of it, you're not actually getting all of that at one point. So, with certain dosages of the supplementation, you might be only recommended to take it 3 times a week, because that's actually all that's required.
Right.
Which is why the fortified foods don't quite work as well. It's just like a huge amount, and your body can only take in so much at one point in time. I think that's the most simplest way I can explain it.
That's kind of how I do it for clients as well. Like with B12, basically from my own readings, it seems like I will recommend 100 mcgs per day of B12, but that times 7, so a week, that's 700, right? But then the other recommendation is if you're only going to take a 1 weekly dose, it's like 2,000 mcgs. So it's like it doesn't match. It's like, why are they taking 2,000 when they should only be taking 700? But it's for that exact same reason you just mentioned. It's like if you're taking more, there's only a small percentage of that that's actually being absorbed. So potentially little and often is actually a little bit better. But then, of course, you we'd forget. So
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of like try to find a method that works for you.
Yeah, and an easy balance between the two things. But yeah, I'd say that's definitely one of the key nutrients to be wary of at the moment. Yeah.
So B12 is definitely one of those ones that, the symptoms will show themselves. You mentioned iron. That's another one where potentially people will feel that one. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You'd feel that like fatigue, weakness. A lot of people say like difficulty concentrating, difficulty actually like if they're reading, like being able to read the entire page. And if they're exercising, probably feeling a little bit lightheaded, like getting a little bit of those blackouts too.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that, the requirements for vegans for iron is significantly higher. It's about 1.8 times the amount if you're eating like a standard diet. So, for example, if you're someone who's menstruating and eating like an animal-based diet, you need 18 milligrams of iron. But as a vegan, you need about 32.
Wow.
And that's huge. That's a lot of food in a day to be eating. It's not impossible.
Because usually the recommendation is like just for omnivores, it's like 7 milligrams for guys and like 12 for ladies or something like that, which is a huge difference to, like you just mentioned, like 28 or whatever. How would people go about achieving that amount? Because that is quite a tall task. Yeah,
and I think eating fortified foods really is the key there. So, for example, like some cereals such as like Wheat Bix Special K, the manufacturers will add iron into them.
Yeah.
Choosing like your veggie burgers or your meat product replacements that actually have iron added into them as well. And there's a couple of like, plant yogurts and plant milks and things like that might have a little bit of them in it, depending on what brands that you're sort of going for. But they can be a huge help. There is a couple protein powders on the market too. So for those who do consume protein powder, I always recommend that's fortified with iron, because you're just doing yourself a benefit or a service totally. By getting 2 in 1. It's just practical.
Yeah, totally. And I guess the issue with iron is that the absorption, because the iron from plants is what we call non-heme iron.
Correct.
In animals, heme iron, and heme iron from animal products is absorbed to a greater percent than non-heme iron. So it's just a case of trying to get more of those plant foods in. What would be some of like the big hitters in terms of like whole plant foods that we could try and get for iron?
For iron, yeah. So like your beans and your legumes, so you like your brown lentils, chickpeas, absolutely really good sources of iron, as well as your nuts and seeds, in particular pumpkin seeds are a really good source of iron. So that's really good. Cool. And then you've got like your whole grains as well. So like your whole grain breads and quinoa. Yeah. And then your dark leafy greens. It's like your kale and your spinach. And if you cook them, it improves the absorption rates as well.
Right.
And of course you've got like your tofu and stuff that has a little bit of iron in it as well.
Yeah. It seems like that's a great recommendation for a lot of foods in order to achieve that, nutrient dense diet, is to try to cook or soak or sprout a lot of these grains and seeds to help with the absorption. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of these plants have a compound called phytates, and phytates can sort of hinder the absorption of some nutrients, iron being one of them. And we found that when we can either cook or soak it, it reduces how much phytate is in that plant, and therefore you're absorbing more of it. So that's really good. And I guess another thing that can help enhance absorption of iron-rich foods is eating something that's rich in vitamin C. I always like to say iron and vitamin C are like best friends. They go hand in hand together. So foods rich in vitamin C are essentially like your fruits and your vegetables.
Yeah.
So I guess on a plant-based diet, that's a benefit. Like if you're just eating, say, a steak, right, if you're eating a meat-eating diet, you're probably not going to get much vitamin C on the side if you're just, having your plain old steak. But, as a vegan, you tend to eat your vegetables and things like that. People are pretty good. So you're getting that vitamin C in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a great tip. And I've also, read other tips around avoiding tea and coffee close to consuming a meal that's, you're trying to enhance iron absorption, because that can inhibit the absorption somewhat. So I think that's another good one as well. As like, cool, like try, keep that an hour or so away from a meal.
For sure.
Cool. So that's iron, and that tends to be quite a big one, especially for ladies, of course, when they're menstruating, that becomes a much bigger area of concern. And then moving on, we've got calcium.
Yep.
Another big one that's quite often talked about. From your perspective and, you know, your understanding of nutrition, how important is calcium and this idea that, you know, without milk products, you know, you're not going to get your calcium and you're not going to have strong bones, or, you know, especially for kids, you know, for, you know, this idea of like, well, can you raise kids vegan on a plant-based diet? You know, there's a lot of people saying that it can be done, and I think even the Dietetics Association is stating that it can be done. But then, of course, there's a lot of people against it. And so, you know, what's your view on sort of calcium in the diet in regards to like bone health?
Yeah, calcium, absolutely essential vitamin or mineral, I should say, that we do need to be consuming in adequate amounts, and that amount does change depending on what age that you're at. So essentially what happens by the time that you're 20, you've reached your peak bone mass. So your bones have absorbed all the calcium that they can. So, you know, that's why it's really important for kids to be getting the correct amount. From there, it's only bone breakdown after that. So super, super essential. It is not just essential for bone health too. It's essential for, you know, the contractility or rhythm of your heart, for hormone health, for your health of your blood as well. So it's not just from a bone perspective. Right. But it's absolutely possible and quite easy now to get enough calcium on a plant-based diet. It can be done. And I'd say probably the easiest way is choosing calcium-fortified products like your milks and your yogurts. And it's wonderful to see all the options that are out there now that didn't exist 10 years ago or so. So I guess a good little tip is if you're looking at the back of a packet of like a soy milk or an almond milk, you want to make sure it's got at least 120 milligrams of calcium per 100 mil of product.
That's cool.
So that's a really good guideline to look out for. Same thing with your plant yogurts. So your soy yogurt or your almond yogurt. But outside of the fortified foods, you know, you can also get it from calcium set tofu. So that the water that the tofu actually sits in can either be magnesium set or it can be calcium set. And you can check that on the ingredient list. So the tofu will absorb that calcium into there.
Yeah.
So you can get it from there. You can get it from leafy greens, nuts and seeds, particularly like almonds and sesame seeds. So there's plenty of opportunity to get enough calcium into your diet for sure.
I've always seen that idea or that tip of, hey, get calcium set tofu if you can. And I've never quite figured out how to work that out. And often, in the past, actually, I used to buy a lot of like raw, like made that day tofu from like a local Asian shop. And so I had no idea. Like I could try and ask them, I guess, how they produced it. But generally most people are buying, you know, from a packet from the supermarket these days. So on the back, will it actually state how it's set?
Yeah, in brackets next to like towards the end of the ingredient list, it'll normally say like magnesium or it will say calcium. If not, there's like a number, like usually starting with a 5, and you can look that up.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember at the top of my head, you know, which number is which.
Yeah.
But from memory, the Evergreen brand are all calcium set.
Right.
Tofu, and they have a wide range, you know, varying from silken all the way up to extra firm.
Okay.
So it's pretty good. So that brand is all calcium set.
Cool. Yeah, I don't think we have that one in New Zealand actually. I'll have to go and have a look at the ones we do have and see which ones are calcium set or not. But I think that's a great one. Is like, you can easily get it from your tofu if it's calcium set. Your plant milks. You mentioned, was it nuts and seeds?
Yeah.
Decent one. Leafy greens.
Yeah.
They decent for calcium, not so much.
Broccoli and bok choy in particular have a good amount of calcium in there. And maybe like your spinach, maybe not as a reliable source, but definitely broccoli and bok choy pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess circling back to like bone health, I think another key idea there is that there is this kind of interplay between calcium and vitamin D for bone health as well. I think, you know, a lot of people are fixated on the calcium being the primary, I guess, nutrient of concern for bone health. But I think, you know, it is mediated by vitamin D status as well, from my understanding.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've read the same things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think vitamin D is another key nutrient there that, you know, without it, you know, you're going to be in a bad place from many, many different standpoints, especially from the immune system and things like that. So what are your recommendations for vitamin D? And that's generally one that's probably not really something we can achieve through our diet.
Yeah, vitamin D is a little bit of a trickier one, particularly if you're living in a climate where it's not so sunny all the time, because we can, obviously, as we know, get some vitamin D from the sun. But a good way is, again, fortified products. So some of the plant milks might have them in there, some of the plant yogurts as well, some of the veggie burgers and stuff that the manufacturers add it, and some like of the vegan butters, like the Nuttalexes and things, the manufacturers will put vitamin D into there. But otherwise, if you're not consuming those foods on a regular basis, it is a good idea to supplement. It is one of those ones where you can become deficient, and it can impact your health long term if you're not on top of that. So I would recommend supplementation if you can't be getting those foods all the time. There is a little tip around putting mushrooms out in the sun. I don't know if you've heard of that one before, but if you leave them in the sun for 15 minutes, they actually can soak up some of the vitamin D. And then when you cook them, obviously you're absorbing that.
Amazing. Yeah.
But, that not everyone can do that every single day.
Right.
It's not exactly that practical.
Yeah.
But it can help. That's for sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess for people who are in climates where the sun is not always shining.
Yes.
Which, is most people during the winter, and then a lot of people even during their like summer months, it's not, super sunny. You can achieve your vitamin D daily intake quite easily through sun exposure. But the key there is that you have to have a decent amount of your skin actually exposed to the sun without sunblock.
Yeah.
So, it's a bit of a tricky one because you want to be wary of, the damage that sun can do to your skin, but at the same time, it's a great way to get that vitamin D absorption. So, kind of being aware of your own burn times, and going, okay, cool. Well, I can usually do, 10 minutes in the sun before I start burning. Great. Maybe you can do that with, 20% of your skin exposed to the sun, get that vitamin D absorption, and then either put some clothing on, cover up, or put your sunblock on after that.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah. So I think that's a great way to go.
Yeah.
So generally, like with a lot of my clients, I'm like, look, in the summer, if you're getting out every day, like, don't worry about your vitamin D supplementation. You're probably fine. But for most people in the winter, I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, for sure. And what I found was, I think during the lockdowns here in Melbourne, as you know, we're in lockdown for a very long time. I think every single person in Melbourne was vitamin D deficient. Just every single person that was coming through, like your levels have just plummeted.
Wow,
and that's because we couldn't get outside and we couldn't, get the sun that we needed to. So, it's not just vegans who, are vitamin D deficient. It's like at a population level, it's quite prevalent.
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure. Cool. So what are some of the ones we haven't sort of touched on here? You mentioned some of the other nutrients of focus.
Yeah, omega-3
Right.
is definitely a really important one for heart health, brain health, eye functioning, skin, hair, from an anti-inflammatory point of view as well. So, most people have heard that it comes from fish normally, but you can get it through plant-based foods. You can get it through things like chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, and walnuts. But again, like the absorption rates aren't quite as well as what it would be from fish. There's different types of omega-3 fatty acids, and they need to be converted into a more well-absorbed form. So I guess the key with omega-3 is consistency, right? So you want to be trying to have one of those key foods that I just mentioned every day, if you can, and a decent serve size. So either like a good handful of walnuts or about 2 tablespoons of those seed mixes.
Yeah.
And if you can't, that's where you'd be looking at like a plant-based supplement, like an algae-based one, where you'd take sort of a 1 to 2 a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you feel that, having those kind of serving sizes of either the walnuts or the seeds options would be sufficient for people to attain those kind of omega-3 levels? And we're talking here about the conversion of the plant form of omega-3 ALA into EPA and DHA.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Do you think that that is sufficient to
I think if people are consistent with it, and I mean by consistent, like not actually skipping days with it, then yes. But if you're the kind of person who's only doing it like twice a week, then no, you're going to need to supplement. Yeah, absolutely, because that conversion is just not going to happen.
Yeah. I've heard the conversion rate is like 5% or something.
Yeah,
Very, very low.
it's very low.
Yeah. So having like decently high dosages of those seeds or walnuts is quite helpful. I've also noted that, again, with clients that I've had in fat loss phases when calories are getting lower, struggling to just achieve those levels because, seeds and nuts generally are quite calorically dense.
Yeah.
So in those situations, it's quite easy for us to just supplement.
Yep.
But most people who are, kind of eating, again, like for this particular podcast, and we're focusing on people who are wanting to eat a diet that is nutritionally adequate, really, really dense and all of the key nutrients of focus that we're talking about, then trying to get in a couple of tablespoons of seeds per day, some walnuts, it's not really a hard task.
Not at all.
But just finding maybe a meal where you can be most consistent. And I find for a lot of clients, it's like breakfast. It's like, well, they might be having oats or a smoothie. Great. You can easily chuck 2 tablespoons of, flat ground flax or chia or hemp into those and you're done every day. Tick it off.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I love smoothies for that very reason. I think it's really easy to just add your chia seeds and your flax into that, as is like oats, overnight oats, that sort of thing. And if not, you can just pick up a good handful of walnuts and be on your way. Use that as a snack. So it's not difficult, but you're definitely right about like when people are on lower calorie amounts in a fat loss phase, they're very dense foods at the end of the day. So, a supplement in that situation absolutely makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Cool. So omega-3, I think that's another really key focus, nutrient of focus there. Any of those other ones that you think are important for people to actually consider? Because we hear people talk about selenium, iodine, zinc. How important do you feel these ones are?
I feel that all of them are very important, and particularly selenium because it's not as well talked about, and I guess like you don't really, you can get it, but you don't hear about selenium supplementation as much, and it's something that's very easy to do. All you need to do is have 2 Brazil nuts a day. It has 100% of your selenium requirements, and selenium is an important mineral for thyroid health essentially, and for like DNA health and replication. So it's also really hard to test for. It's not something that's normally put on a blood test, so you're not going to know if you are deficient in selenium, whereas iron and zinc you can test on a standard blood test, and you can say, okay, well, I'm deficient, like I can temporarily supplement to get my levels back up. But with selenium and as well as omega-3 and iodine, they're not part of the normal testing regimen. So it's quite difficult.
Interesting. So can you ask to have that test, or is it just not something they actually know how to test? Or
you can have your iodine tested. It's actually a urinary test, like a urinary iodine. You can. Omega-3, I believe you can buy like a testing kit online, but I personally don't know how like valid that they are. Like I don't know if they're from like other countries or overseas, but I personally, I don't know if you've come across like a selenium test.
No. I mean, I just assumed that maybe you would. I actually haven't thought about it in regards to like whether you would find that on a normal. You would have to request it on a normal blood test, but even then, maybe it's something you can't request.
Yeah.
It's not something I actually know.
Yeah. I mean, I've never seen a situation where I've seen an omega-3 test in Australia. I've seen it done through a testing kit in the US. That was the only time that I've actually physically seen it, but happy to hear suggestions from anyone else if they know about testing around that. But I think that's why it's important to be on top of it. Because of that lack of awareness around, okay, am I getting enough or not? Like the selenium is really easy, like just pop in 2 Brazil nuts, and that's another one we can just pop into the smoothie every single morning if you don't like eating it, and put it a part of the walnuts that you were having. So that's a pretty simple one, I would say.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and so would there be like physical symptoms of a deficiency from selenium?
You might. I think that the symptoms overlap a lot with like, your iron and your zinc around your fatigue, but your thyroid hormones might be a little bit out of your reference ranges as well because of its role with thyroid health.
Right.
So that's why, again, it's hard to know because there's such an overlap between iron, zinc, selenium.
Right.
It's hard to know where it's coming from, really.
And that's another. It's actually leading on to like iodine is another one of those ones that I'm pretty sure is in relation to thyroid health.
Absolutely.
Also,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And they actually started putting iodine in the population's table salt. I don't know what date they did that, and I can't remember which countries did it, but I think it was like the UK and Europe, and I know they do it in New Zealand, probably Australia as well.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Because populations were deficient in iodine, and it's obviously an essential nutrient. So it's relatively easy to get, but what would be your recommendations to achieve, sufficient iodine? Would it be supplementation? Would it be a certain amount of table salt? Would it be some other kind of products?
Yeah, I just usually say the simple swap of making sure you're having iodized salt. That's one of the main things that I recommend. I think a lot of people are having like the pink Himalayan salts now. It sort of was like on trend a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But then in Australia, I'm not sure if it's the same as New Zealand. It's mandatory for the bread, or commercial made breads, I should say, to have iodized salt in them. So they are fortified with iodine. Unless you're getting an organic bread, that's the only time it wouldn't have it in there. So if you are consuming like a couple pieces of bread a day, plus you're using your iodized salt in your cooking, you're likely to get a decent amount into your diet.
Yeah, and what would you say to people listening who are wanting to reduce their sodium intake, so reducing their salt intake on a daily basis, and yet we're suggesting, hey, use some iodized table salt?
Yeah, that might be a good time to look into like a bit of a vegan multivitamin then, to see if there is iodine in the multivitamin itself, because other foods sort of rich in iodine are also rich in salt too, like your seaweed and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's got a high sodium content too. So if there's the issue of hypertension or high blood pressure, that's where the multivitamin might come in useful.
Do you feel that most people you work with need to be watching their salt intake?
I would say the majority of people I work with have a pretty good diet. Like they're pretty healthy at the moment, maybe not when they first started out. So a moderate amount is okay for them to be consuming. But then I suppose if there is anyone who's coming to see me with hypertension, on top of whatever other goals that they're wanting to work on, that's when you'd be looking at your supplementation route, because we're not wanting to rely on just salt.
So people with high blood pressure and kind of the link to higher sodium intakes. Right. And I think probably one thing to make clear is that I guess for most people in the Western world, a lot of their sodium is coming from packaged foods anyway, right? So it's a case of, well, you could probably get away with adding that iodized table salt to your meals if you were consuming far less of packaged food varieties, because you're reducing your sodium intake drastically by doing that. Sodium is an essential, part of human health. We do need it.
Yeah.
But in the levels that we do consume it is generally in relation to just, overconsumption of processed foods.
Yeah.
So if we can reduce that to some extent, include more whole foods, and then add a bit of iodized salt, you're kind of, getting your iodine, you're reducing your processed foods, you're achieving somewhat more of that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is important to acknowledge that there is trace amounts in some fruits and vegetables, like for example potatoes, but being in Australia, our soil quality is quite poor. It's quite barren of nutrients. So sometimes we're not getting as much iodine as what it might be saying that's in like the potato, for example. So again, that comes down to like that variety too. If you're having a wide variety of foods, you're likely going to hit the majority of these nutrients. That's why like diversity is so important.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, let's dive into that. So with diversity, we're talking about number of different foods you would eat in a certain period of time. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you can put it down to different sort of colours, food groups, types of food. A general really good recommendation is 30 different plant foods a week. There was a study done by the American Gut Association, and they found that those who were consuming 30 plants or more a week had a really great healthy gut microbiome. And we know from all the research and studies that have come out the importance of the gut microbiome on not just our overall health, but also weight, chronic disease management, and mental health as well. So if we're getting that good diversity and hitting that quota every single week, you're just going to be automatically doing yourself a favour. Yeah,
so lots of different plants, lots of different colours.
Yeah.
And that's going to really help, boost those healthy gut bugs that we're we know are really beneficial for many different health outcomes.
Yeah, and it's 30 sounds like a lot, but at the end of the day, it's not that hard. Like if you're someone who eats strawberries, if you swap to mixed berries, you're already boosting it by 4.
Yeah.
That's an extra 4 plants. If you're someone who is only eating like almonds and then you do like a mixed seed, you're boosting it by another 4. So it is quite easy to do. It's actually not like something that you overly have to think about too much.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
you posted on your Instagram recently around like a 30 plant challenge.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I think you actually posted like some of your daily checks for that as well. And I think it was like one day you already hit like 20 something number of plants.
Yeah, that first day, it was really interesting. So that first day I thought it was around like the 15, 16. Then I noticed myself by the week that was going through, like as it dwindled on, like it was getting less and less because you can't tick off a food that you've already eaten. That's the whole idea of the challenge. Like if you've already had cauliflower on Monday, you can't tick it off again, right?
Okay.
So by like sort of Saturday, I was like, well, I'm only getting like 1 or 2 here.
Yeah,
so even with myself, I was like, okay, what food can I have that I don't normally consume? What grain can I try to like boost the diversity? It was good, like even like a little mental exercise just to do like, oh, you know, I haven't maybe had quinoa this week. Let's like try and have that instead of having like, you know, a rice-based dish or something to that nature. So it's good. It makes you try new things, and I think it's a really helpful little full checklist. Yeah,
that's awesome. And I've heard, her name's just I've just lost her name, but I think it's an American researcher in gut health. She wrote a really good book recently. I can't remember her name. Anyways. Dr. Megan Rossi.
Oh, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. So she talks about diversity and the number of plants you consume in a week, and some of those great tips you mentioned around like, you know, if you're having like, maybe you usually pick like frozen broccoli. Well, what if you pick like frozen broccoli with carrots and beans in it as well? Like, you know, so those simple tricks. But you know, she mentioned, I think she has like the big 6 or whatever she calls it, where it's another kind of thing to tick off, where it's like, hey, well, we need to tick off each day. It's something like, you know, whole grains, legumes, fruits, you know, different, you know, so big items you need to tick off on a daily basis. Do you have a similar thing that you do with clients in regards to like, hey, we want to achieve some kind of balance within a day? How do we actually do this? Like, what's the practical steps? Because it's all well and good for, you know, listeners to listen to this and go, okay, cool, I need to get my iron, I need to get my calcium. These are the foods I can include, but they'll probably forget it by the end of this podcast.
Yeah.
What are some simple steps they can actually use to like build their meals on a day-to-day basis, knowing that if they build it like this, they're probably, without thinking too hard, they're probably going to be able to hit most of those nutrients of focus. And, you know, maybe this is the kind of education that, you know, some of these names who have decided to go back to animal products could have utilized. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely do a bit of a vegan nutrient checklist with my clients, where I give them a bit of a list about the nutrients that we sort of spoke about, and like the little tasks that they can do around the omega-3s and the Brazil nuts and that sort of thing. But then I also have like around my little healthy plate model, like how to build the meals from the bottom up. So what are some good grains to be incorporated that maybe have a bit of a higher protein content, a bit of a higher iron content in there as well. So starting off with that. Then we've got like a vegetable side of things as well. Like, you know, what's the diversity of 3 colors? Is that a good goal for someone? Is that a bit too hard? Is 2 enough? I'll try to pick at least 2 different colors. That would be a really good starting point. If you can get 4, amazing. Not everyone can do that. And then sort of around your proteins, like maybe picking 1 to 2 different protein sources. So like tofu and beans, as opposed to just a huge amount of beans on your meal. Like you're getting your diversity in from that. And then a serving of fats as well, healthy fats, whether that be the oil that you're cooking with, or some avocado or nuts or seeds, whatever it might be. And I provide my patients or my clients with those resources and examples of that as well. So cool. I think that's a really good way. And if you're prepping 1 to 2 meals a week that follow that structure, you're automatically going to hit like 80 to 90% of those requirements. Like if you've done like, say, like a high protein like pasta,
using, so let's say textured vegetable protein, for example, where it's got a good amount of iron and zinc and protein, and you're using a protein-based pasta and you've got your veggies, that's a really good one. And then the other one might be like a really nice curry with some beans and some tofu in there. Those two meals alone, cooked with high dose salt, there you go, is a really good way to hit, I'd say, the main percentage of your nutrient requirements, and you don't have to think too much about it.
Yeah. So it's providing, like, it's focusing on some real simple, structured-based eating. So when you cook a meal, don't just cook for the sake of fueling yourself, although, you know, sometimes we have to do that. Like I mentioned to you today, I was like starving after being on the plane all morning, not eating, and then just running to wherever I could find to like fill the void I was feeling, just to get some fuel. But there's most of the time we should be focusing on consuming meals that are well thought out, so that they're actually achieving some kind of these, ticking some of these boxes. And even for myself, when I'm traveling like I am right now, like today I've really had very little nutrients, just because I've been grabbing stuff on the go. But I had that in the back of my mind. I'm like, okay, well, maybe when I go and grab some dinner tonight, I'm going to try and find a place where I can stack up the veggies that I haven't consumed today already, and kind of tick some of those boxes. And I do a similar thing to yourself. I have a bit of a checklist for clients to work through each day. And, you know, with myself, I don't physically do a checklist, you know, on paper or on a spreadsheet with myself, but I kind of have it in the back of my mind as I go through my day. Have I ticked off my leafy greens today? Have I had some legumes today? Where did I get my berries in today? Like some of these kind of key food groups that I know are going to be really nutrient, dense with nutrients, but also dense with not just the micronutrient side of things, but like those phytonutrients that are also going to be really, really beneficial for, you know, prevention of, you know, chronic disease and increasing longevity and all these good things we can get from a lot of these phytonutrients in plants as well. But it is coming back to like having structure and planning, like really actually spending time in your week to go, okay, I need to plan these meals. And that really is like the biggest thing for most of my clients is like prep your meals. Because without it, it's very, very hard for them to hit their goals. But when they do it, every week goes relatively smoothly. And it's just a case of actually setting that time aside and amongst a busy, you know, Western world situation where time is you know, usually a bit of a struggle, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. We're all working, balancing a different number of priorities. It's really hard to go home every single night after a long day and cook up a storm, you know, of this perfectly well-balanced meal that's going to tick every single box. So that's where I absolutely agree with you that prepping can come in so handy. And for me, it's been a lifesaver, you know, particularly last year I was working like quite late in clinics, and if I had to come home at 9 o'clock and have to cook, it just wouldn't happen. I would go for takeaway. It would, you know, physically I wasn't even had the energy to do it. So that's coming home and having a prep meal that I had made a few days prior saved everything. It was absolutely perfect and what I need. And I encourage people to do the same. And it doesn't have to be you've got every single meal prep for the next 7 days, you know, meticulously all in containers. It can be you've bulk cooked something, or even your dinner the night before, you've made an extra serving of that because you know the next day you're going to be super busy and not have time. Yeah.
100%. I think those are all really, really good tips for people. There's one thing I did want to cover with you, Melissa, is in regards to like anything that you encourage clients to avoid when it comes to, you know, trying to achieve a balanced diet. Like, for example, should people try to, you know, consume a certain amount of sugar per day? Should they be limiting that? Or maybe it's oils that they should be limiting, or you know, when people talk about toxins in certain foods and things like this, are there any of these things that kind of ring true for you in your practice that you actually encourage people to control in the I guess pursuit of a balanced diet?
Yeah, I guess that's a really complex question because it would depend on if the client had like a condition, like for example irritable bowel. There's obviously foods that we need to be avoiding. If you've got high cholesterol, if there's foods that you need to be avoiding. But as a general sort of statement, I would definitely be encouraging like a sort of reduced sugar intake. Now, I'm not talking about sugar from fruit. Like, obviously that's fine. I'm talking about like added sugar, processed sugars, that sort of thing. And I would say like your saturated fats. So, you know, a lot of people think that on a vegan diet you can't get high cholesterol because there's no cholesterol in plant foods. But what increases cholesterol is actually saturated fat. And one food that is high in saturated fat is coconut. So a lot of people sort of have swapped over to coconut oil, using a lot of coconut yogurt. I would encourage not consuming excess amounts of coconut, just because it actually can contribute to increasing cholesterol levels, and therefore I wouldn't recommend using coconut oil as well. I'd recommend using extra virgin olive oil in your cooking. I'd say those are the main ones, outside of if you've got a specific condition that you need to be limiting certain foods, like as we said earlier, hypertension and salt and that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I guess, you know, it's just a case of being aware of a few of those things. But potentially, I think for a lot of people, achieving balance, like we kind of alluded to before, is ensuring that there is flexibility.
Yes.
There's no feelings of huge restriction. In regards to that, on that same train of thought, what is your approach to kind of balancing whole food versus processed food? And that's a topic that I often cover with clients. It's a topic that a lot of people love to debate, especially when we talked about previously around like people in these subsets or camps of kind of plant-based eating who are exclusively whole food plant-based, and you know they preach that from the rooftops. Personally, I think for majority of people I work with, people I know, and the way I want to live, it's not conducive to a great, I would say, balanced lifestyle from like a social perspective as well. Like when I look at overall health, yes, like your food and nutrition is a part of it, but also your social life is a part of it. And I make this point when I talk about meal timing as well. You know, ideally, from a metabolic standpoint, it would be ideal not to consume a large amount of calories in the biological night, like after sundown. But sometimes I've been out with friends for dinner and we want ice cream at 9:30.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what we're going to do, because that's a part of our social life. That's a part of the enjoyment we get out of being together. It's not ideal, but it's not all the time either. So there is kind of that ebb and flow of balance there. So I guess what I'm asking is, how do you approach that balance between processed food, whole foods, and that whole debate?
Yeah, I like to approach it with a very simple 80-20 rule. I think that's a really good place to start off with. So that means 80% of the time you're eating your whole foods, you're eating well, and then your 20% of the time you're allowing a little bit of indulgence, whether that's on the weekends or you'd like to spread it out throughout the week, however works best for you. But as I guess the balance comes in, like you're not going too over the top with things, and at the same time you're actually allowing yourself, if you know you're running late and you know you need to get something quick, or you know you're socializing with friends, whatever it might be, it allows for that flexibility there. And I think that's healthy, and it's just part of life. You can't always be bang straight on with everything. You can't be 100% perfect with what you do.
What would be some real simple practical take homes for people who want to implement this on a daily basis? Maybe they're struggling with balance at the moment. Maybe they've had a blood test and it's not come up, you know, amazing. There's certain things they're deficient in.
Yeah.
Is there kind of like a catch-all sort of idea or practical thing that they can use? Maybe it's coming back to that checklist we talked about, or there's something else. Or how would you kind of summarize all of this information to someone maybe who you know ride an elevator with, and you're trying to explain to them about balance in their diet?
Yeah. Oh, I think I would definitely recommend, you know, as we said earlier, about prepping the 1 to 2 meals a week that are quite nutrient dense, just to help yourself out. So that's definitely a really good starting point. But also learning what foods fall under which of those nutrients, as we discussed. So that comes into that checklist sort of thing. And learning how to label read, I think, is really important. So, for example, when you're in the milk aisle, like the plant-based milks, and okay, is it fortified with calcium? And you're able to quickly look at it. It's going to save you time. You don't have to scour through brand after brand after brand, and just having like your one key brand that you sort of go towards each time. So if you're learning like how to label read, you'll know, is it fortified with calcium? Has it got zinc? Has it got iron in it? That's going to save you a lot of time too. So I guess meal prep, label reading, and having a bit of a checklist happening, that's going to get you pretty far, I would say. And then if you're still struggling, that would be a pretty good time to see a dietitian or someone like a nutrition coach or something, just for them to review your diet, see if there's anything that you might be missing, and that can provide you with the recommendations there on what at a personal level you might need to be doing.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. Yeah, I think that is the point where you go, hey, look, maybe I invest in some professional help here. Someone like yourself who is, following that lifestyle already. You're plant-based, and you've been doing it for a long time. You're obviously healthy. You're working out. You're doing all those things that are, you're in a really good place, following that kind of balanced lifestyle. And you've also got the credentials there to ensure that you can help people. And I think that's a big one, is actually ensuring that people are qualified as well to help you. Anyone can read a book and kind of regurgitate the information, but when it's coming to like nutrition, and like you said, working with different gut health issues, IBS, women's health, like a lot of those things that you do work with, I think you definitely got to have someone who's got those credentials there. Hey?
Yeah, absolutely, because then you're adding on another layer of complexity there, like irritable bowel. You've got the subset of the FODMAP diet that involves cutting out a lot of plants, and if you're already vegan, it is quite difficult to do. So if you're in that sort of situation, you definitely need some professional help there. It's a little bit hard, but if you're just like general and you're feeling quite healthy and quite good, I think those tips would be quite adequate for you.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, well, maybe we'll have to do another one and get you to talk about gut health.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's one we haven't dived into in any great detail on the podcast yet, but that's something you do work a lot with clients on, is their gut health. Yeah,
absolutely. It's one of my interest areas, I would say. I guess it stems from my own experience with irritable bowel and quite a horrible experience at that, where I lost a lot of weight and couldn't eat anything. So that drives me to want to be able to help people to figure out what they can and can't have. So I had to do extra accreditation to do the FODMAP course and things like that. So I really enjoy it. I think it's really good. It's a very rewarding space to work in, because you see that progress quite quickly, which is amazing. Wonderful. Yeah.
And now, do you mind me asking how your diet looks now? Is that something you have to focus on in terms of your gut health now?
At the moment, I've pretty much worked out what I can and can't have, and I know how to moderate it, and I don't restrict it as well. Like if in a restaurant there's a high FODMAP food that I know I'm going to react to, sometimes I just have it, and I just suffer the consequences later, I suppose. But I'm able to make that decision now, whereas before I didn't know. And that confusion was so overwhelming. Like, why is this happening? Why am I in so much pain all the time? But now I'm able to be more in control of it and say, I'm going to have some cauliflower. I'm going to be in a bit of pain later, but it's in this meal. I'm just going to consume it. So I don't really have to think about things too much anymore. I would say the only other thing I consider is with my exercise regimen and things, I do have to prioritize protein a little bit more than what I was previously. But again, I'm sort of used to that at this point in time, and I know when to have it and how much to have.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it's just that knowledge, and having someone like yourself would be quite helpful for people to work through those particular issues with, because you've got the experience yourself, anecdotal experience, but you've also got the training there to actually help them get through it. So that's cool, and get to a point like you are where you can make those decisions on the go as to what you will eat, how much of what you will eat, because your triggers and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's the most important part. So for me, it's not something I have to think too hard about, which is great. It's nice.
Cool. Well, before we kind of wrap up here, Mel, is there anything that we haven't covered in regards to achieving a balanced or a healthy diet as a vegan that you'd like to touch on?
No, I think we've pretty much covered everything. It's been quite a good talk about all the major tips that we can sort of be integrating into the diet. I think we've covered the most of it. Yeah.
Sure. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you, what's on the cards for you for 2023? Have you got anything going on? Like, are you working in clinic, online? Is there anything, you want to let the listeners know of what you're getting up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm seeing clients both face-to-face and online through telehealth consults, so I can consult Australia-wide. So I'm continuing to see clients in that space. Thinking in the process of, sort of developing a recipe book at the moment, whether that's just general vegan or like gut health sort of related. I haven't quite decided yet, but it's definitely in the works, which is really exciting. And then I guess from a personal perspective, I'm training for a marathon at the moment.
Whoa.
So that's taking up a lot of my time. So it's been a bit of a change to my normal routine, but it's pretty good, and so far so good at the moment.
That's awesome. How far are you through?
I can run 30K at the moment.
You're quite the way through.
But didn't pull up too well after it. Feet were a bit sore.
Yeah.
So, it's not till October, which is good. I've got plenty of time.
But you've already done
nice.
30.
Yeah, I did 30 about a few weeks ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I hope you're going to taper back from that now and then
just try to maintain for a bit. My concern, I'm going away in the middle of the year, so hopefully I can maintain some sort of fitness level during that point and then get back into it again. That's why I'm trying to do everything now. Then because I know I'll have a bit of a decline June, July sort of period.
And is it the Melbourne?
Yeah, the Melbourne Marathon.
Cool. And have you done any long running events in the past?
I've done halves.
Cool.
And I've signed up for a half in May, the Great Ocean Road half.
Oh, cool.
Brooks Half Marathon. So apparently that's meant to be a really beautiful course. So I'm looking forward to that. But no other official races. So I am a little bit nervous.
Cool. What is it about running that you love?
I really like the sense of accomplishment that it gives me, and for me, it's very calming. Once you hit a certain kilometre, not at the start, it's a little bit rocky, but once you get sort of into it, it's kind of like your mind is just like blank, and it's very, I guess, like relaxing sort of thing to be doing. Yeah,
it's kind of like I actually did a marathon last year, and it's kind of one of those things. It's like people are like, I don't know how you run so far, and I'm like, or like enjoy running. I'm like, no one really enjoys running when they start.
Yeah.
Because you're not fit enough to enjoy it. You're just suffering the whole time. But once you get to a point where it's like, a lot of the training runs for marathons are quite easy runs. Like slower paces, and you're just kind of like doing the kilometers. You can kind of just cruise and enjoy it, and like you said, just relax and let your mind go. But those first few kilometers are always a little bit creaky, and you're trying to get into the groove, and then once you're in that groove, it's smooth, hey?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like you said, you're not sprinting it. You're doing it at a pretty cruisy pace to begin with, especially when you're starting out. So
that's right.
It's not as if you're like dying at every second. It does get enjoyable at a point, which might be, weird for some people to hear, but it actually isn't as bad as you would think it would be.
Yeah, I remember, listening to some guys talk about running your first marathon, and it was always the case of coming back to like the goal is already big enough of actually finishing 42.2 kilometers. That's a big enough goal already without having to put this other like qualification on, like you have to run it this fast. It's like, no, just run it, like however fast you want to run it, just run it and enjoy it and tick it off, and that's what I did. Is like I didn't run it fast, but I got it done, and it was a mammoth effort, and props to you for giving it a go. It's massive.
No, that's amazing that you've accomplished one as well. Yeah, that's
it was
incredible.
Actually cancelled twice, and the second time it was cancelled, we just went and did it anyway. We just ran the course. Right. Because there was no one there. We were just running it, and which was cool because of course you're doing it under your own esteem.
Yeah,
a little bit harder because you don't have the whole hype around the whole event. But I had a great support crew that were parking at different spots, handing me drinks and lollies and stuff to get me through. But it's definitely one of those things that like once you get a course, in the whole atmosphere, I think it really enhances the experience as well.
Amazing.
Yeah. What else are you doing for training? Is it just the running at the moment?
Running and gym and swimming. I'm trying to put a bit of Pilates into there too, but
all the things.
Just a bit of cross training there.
Yeah. Good. That's awesome. Oh wow. Well, we'll have to keep a lookout for this recipe book. Those are always well received by people. I think they're always looking for new ideas, and
Yeah.
you know, whether you do like generic vegan recipes or go down the gut health route, they're both, you know, do really well, I'm sure. Do you actually enjoy cooking as well? Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I quite like cooking. I think for a while last year, because I was just working too much, I sort of lost my mojo with it,
Yeah.
and it became just very mechanical meal prep sort of thing. But now I guess my circumstances have changed. I've got a little bit more time, which is
Cool.
great, and I'm back able to, you know, actually experiment and come up with new ideas, and I always love doing that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, good on you. Well, to finish up here, Mel, I want to ask just like a final recommendation from you. Now, this doesn't have to be nutrition related at all. Like, you know, doesn't have to be like some kind of recommendation in regards to like eat this amount of plants, whatever. Anything that you've been digging lately, whether it's a book, a podcast, a TV show, or, you know, a certain type of training, whatever, like what's a recommendation for the listeners that they might want to check out themselves? What comes to mind?
Oh.
Just
Well,
throwing you on the spot.
speaking of books, actually, I recently joined a book club myself, and
book club?
we're reading Atlas of the Heart.
Amazing.
And I found it very insightful. It's about mapping human emotions, and I actually think that has helped me to understand myself better, and also my clients too. So the author sort of speaks about, you know, each feeling that we experience and how it interlinks with other feelings, and, you know, where that sort of stems from. And it's a really interesting read, and I'd encourage anyone who's sort of into that sort of thing or wanting to like learn a bit more about the psychology side of things to go check it out.
That's amazing.
So it's called Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown, I believe.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
She's really famous author. She's the one who's done a lot of work on vulnerability.
Yeah, that's right. And I think
Yes.
she had a really successful TED Talk
Yes.
as well that's been
Yes.
watched a lot of
Oh, cool.
times. Yeah.
So how does a book club work?
Well, this is my first time, and we've only had one or two meetings so
So
far.
you like meet in person?
Yeah, we met in
I love
person.
that.
Yeah, it's because I used to be good at reading. Well, I used to read a lot, and then I've just haven't read in years, and I need something to keep me accountable. Otherwise, I won't do
cool.
it.
Good on you.
So I've got a group
so
of
they
people.
set you like homework. They're like, you have to read this chapter by the next, or like this amount of chapters by the next meeting.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, like read to the end of chapter 12 or whatever by the end of
Wow.
next meeting, and just talk about what you thought of the book
That's so
after.
cool. I
They do
love
have
that.
questions, but you can go off topic. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
formal or
Yeah, that's
anything.
cool.
It's pretty chill.
I love that though, because it's just like for a lot of people who like, I do enjoy reading, but I because I want to attain so much knowledge, I read a lot of nonfiction,
Yeah.
which is very like dry to read. It's not like a good fiction where you just want to pick it up and
Yeah.
get to the next chapter. So you kind of have to force yourself to do it. And so it's interesting that with this book club, you're actually doing nonfiction.
Yeah, I was surprised too.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
really cool. And, you know, you get a lot of insight, like you said, into your own life with a lot of those kind of more self-helpy ones or like psychology ones. But I guess the other massive benefit to this book club is that like, it's like kind of tying this back into like just health in general. It's community, right? It's like finding people to interact with and meet with and do life with and share and be vulnerable, which, you know, if you look at some of the, you know, the key, I guess, aspects, cornerstones of health, yeah, there's your diet, huge importance. There's your exercise, huge importance. But there's your community as well, right? Which is incredibly important.
Absolutely.
So that's just another way you can interact with people, like especially in a big city like Melbourne. It's like it's hard to do. You know,
Yeah.
you're usually in your own world most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a good way to connect with people, and you got the benefit you're talking about, that one sort of thing, you got something to refer back to, which
Yeah.
is nice as well. And yeah, absolutely right. Like health isn't just about what you eat, it's also that social and emotional aspect of it too.
Yeah.
So nurturing and nourishing that is super important.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, great way to finish there, Mel. Thank you so much for coming here to film with me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Always enjoy the in-person conversations. They flow a lot better, and they're just way more enjoyable. So thanks for hanging out.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's been great.
All right, guys, thanks for sticking with me. Great episode there about achieving balance. Hopefully you can take some of those tips, actually apply them to your diet, to your family's diet, to your friend's diet. If you love the episode, definitely share it around and let Melissa know as well. I'm sure she'd appreciate it. Just a few more things before I finish up here. There's a couple more fantastic episodes coming your way for this season, so I can't wait to get those out to you. But in the meantime, I've actually re-released my 5 Pillars of Body Composition mini course, now titled the Vegan Fitness Mini Course, How to Build Muscle, Lose Fat, and Eat Healthy as a Vegan. This mini course is designed for those who have a physique goal but just haven't quite figured out how to put all the puzzle pieces together just yet. In the course, we cover Presentation 1, why calories matter and how to calculate yours for both fat loss and for muscle gain. Second presentation is all about why we need protein for body composition change, what plants to focus on, and how much you actually need. In Presentation 3, we run through how to grow muscle step by step and stop relying on subpar classes or average programming. We dive into detailed training protocols to optimize muscle growth, how much to train, how to progress, when to take a break, and how to actually measure your progress. In the fourth installment, how to set up your eating patterns so that you optimize health while optimizing your physique. And lastly, we do cover supplements, what you need for performance and what you need for health, and what you need to throw away. So that's the Vegan Fitness Mini Course. I'll chuck a link in the description if you want to check that one out. I'm putting this one up at a super low price, just under $12. You can grab it. 5 in-depth presentations, plus a whole bunch of extra further resources you can dive into, podcasts, articles, things like that. You're going to absolutely love it. It'll give you a bunch of information, and I hope it will, hopefully will really set you up for future success with your muscle gain goals, fat loss goals, and of course, longevity as a vegan. Okay, let's call it there. If you're still with me, awesome. I love you. That's enough selling. We'll catch you in the next one.